things seem to be calming down now, but every time I do that, something. Yep. Exactly. Okay. All right.
Testing, testing. One. Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome to March Life Enrichment. Glad to have you here today. Glad to be back. Our first speaker today is Calla Edwards. She is a horticulture agent with the Butler County Extension Office, here to talk to us about getting our gardens ready for the spring. Welcome.
Helps if I remember to turn the mic on before I start to speak, doesn't it? So, as she said, my name is Calla, and I work for K-State Research and Extension. If you know Larry Krause, I replaced Larry Krause as the horticulture agent, started in September. Growing up, gardening season was always really busy for us. My parents owned a nursery and garden center, so you could imagine the spring months, we had a lot of stuff going on in the greenhouses, starting vegetables, getting geraniums ready to go, doing pots. So spring has always been one of my favorite seasons. And I don't know about you, but last week kind of put me out of the gardening mood. And then the weekend, I'm like, okay, it's time to get started. I've been in North Dakota for 6 years, so this weather has been beautiful. I thought about it back in, was it January? I'm out watering my yard, it's 60 degrees, and I look at my weather app for where I used to live, and it's negative 15, and I'm going, I made a good decision. So, but we're going to talk about getting ready for gardening. Even though we had some cold weather, it's still 20 days until the official first start of spring. Today actually is my dad's birthday, so it's a big milestone in our house. But there's still a lot of stuff that we can do now to get ready for gardening. Because as Mother Nature has shown us this year, it can be 71 degree one day and 20 the next. So a little bit of planning and some things on these nice days, when Mother Nature does decide to cooperate and stay warm, we can be a little ahead of the game, because you never know when she's going to decide to rain for 3 weeks straight and you can't get out in the garden. So one thing that I always recommend you do, I'm kind of glad they gave me a lapel mic so I'm free to wander. I don't like to be tied. But one thing that I always recommend for people is you start with the soil. Because it does not matter if you buy the best plants, if you started the best plants, or if you give them the right care. If your soil is not where it needs to be, if your pH is off, you don't have the right nutrients, your garden is not going to be really productive. And pHs in this area have a pretty wide range from really good for plants to not good. So the first thing I always recommend that we do is we start with the soil and start with a soil test. And as long as the ground is not frozen and it is not completely wet, you can go out and do a soil test right now. The labs aren't really busy, so you'll get your soil results back in about 2 weeks. If you wait till April, May, somewhere in there, it may be 3 or 4 weeks before you get your results back, and you may be already in the garden planting. So for soil test, there's nothing really scientific about it to get it ready. What we want is a good uniform sample of your entire garden. So it doesn't do much good to go and dig a hole in the middle of the garden, take your soil there, because the middle may be slightly different than the edges. So take about 5 to 10 samples scattered all over your garden. If you have a low spot, if you have a high spot, take some samples everywhere so that we know a good snapshot of what's going on. The better snapshot we get, the better results we're going to be able to give you and the better answers we can do to help. So you're going to take those samples. You can use a garden trowel, you can use a shovel. If you want to be really scientific, you can come and borrow the soil probe from our office. But they only need to be about 6 to 8 inches deep. You're going to take those samples, you're going to dump them in a 5-gallon bucket, stir them up, mix them up really well, and then get about 2 cups worth of soil. For a good soil sample, we need, this is a quart baggie, so not quite a full quart baggie would give you enough soil for the soil lab to get good results. And from what you find out from there, then we can make recommendations on if you need to change your pH, if you need to fertilize, or maybe your soils are really good. Some soils actually lately have been coming back really high in some nutrients, and too much is not necessarily good. You can kill your plants just as easily with too much fertilizer as you can with too little. So the soil test really is one of the first things that I recommend, and it's going to be 70, 80 today, almost 70 on Friday. So this is something that you could go out and do. You can bring your sample into the office, we'll mail it off for you, or you can mail it to the soil lab yourself. Something else that we can be doing right now, if we wait later in the season, our soils could get really wet. You could go ahead and work up your soil and add some organic material to it. Leaves, grass clippings from your yard, compost material works really well. I do put in a word of caution against going to like the city dump and getting compost and purchasing compost from there. I've had too many instances where people have done that, and people had taken grass clippings that they had spread lawn fertilizer or lawn herbicides on, and those actually can stay in the compost for several years. So I've had several people that thought they were doing a good thing, they were putting compost on their yard, they really thought that they were adding some organic material. And I had one lady in North Dakota that couldn't garden for 2 years because the herbicide residual was that long. So again, add some composted material, but do be cautious. Composted manure works really well, but again, ask questions when you purchase it. Have they sprayed the outside of the pile? There are some chemicals that actually do go through a cow and can live in the compost, so ask some questions before you get it, because again, that was another issue that I've seen. So organic material is really important. It helps our soils hold water better and helps them be a little more fertile. Which leads us to our next point, to fertilize or not to fertilize. Some fertilizer is going to be needed every year, but it somewhat goes back to your soil test. What did your soil test say? Most of the soil tests that I have seen since I've started have been really high in phosphorus and potassium, and so they don't need to add any more of that. Those are nutrients that kind of stay around in our soil a little bit. If you didn't do a soil test, there's nothing wrong with taking a Gardener Special, a 10-10-10, or just a general all-purpose fertilizer and using it. But if you can do that soil test, then we can help you figure out what you need better.
Are you supposed to soil test every year?
The question is, are you supposed to soil test every year? Yes and no. If you soil test and your pH is good, your nutrients are in good levels, I don't think you need to soil test every year. If you soil test and your pH is off or your nutrients are either really high or really low, I do recommend that you test the next year so we can see how we've changed that test. A soil test, it's not something you have to do every year. I will do one this year, and I'll probably do one for a couple years. We just purchased a house last fall, so I want to see how things are working in my garden, but no, they're not something you have to do every year. And with the soil, Kansas soil, we never get lots of rain, do we? Yeah. Not this year. This year doesn't feel like we've gotten much rain. But now where it's dry is a good time to get in the garden and work with your soil, because we never recommend you work with your soil when it's really wet. If you've ever tried to till your soil up, you know it gets really big clods of dirt. It's not easy to work with. You can also add some compaction to your soil, which could lead to some issues with the roots and things. So if the soil is wet, try not to get out in the garden unless you absolutely have to. You can soil test when it's wet, but again, we recommend not, just because compaction, and it also can cause some issues with the soil going to the lab. So if you do have to do it, let it dry out for a little bit before you get started. And by the way, if you have questions, even if they're not necessarily on the topic I'm talking about, feel free to ask, because I'd rather answer the questions that you guys have than talk about something if it's not something that meets what you need. So, making a plan. This is the worst part for me. I am really bad about this part. Making a plan for your garden. Every spring, who gets garden catalogs? Got a few of you. I have about 6 of them in my house right now. I love looking at garden catalogs because I've got some old, if you garden, you have some plants that you absolutely know you're going to want to plant every year. But garden catalogs are really fun because they give you ideas of something new that you could plant. I like to try something new every year. I've found some of my favorites. I found a really cool bell pepper that's variegated, that grows in a pot, that makes lots of small, sweet bell peppers that are really cool. That was one I tried. I had a small garden in North Dakota, so I tried a compact pumpkin variety. It made little tiny cute pumpkins. He'll be 3 next month. I have a 3-year-old, and he absolutely loved them. He'd pick them and he'd carry them around. But that darn pumpkin, I picked 100 pumpkins off of 2 plants. So it's like, I like to try new things and see what they work. And so those garden catalogs were a lot of fun for me to look at. The pictures are gorgeous. As my dad says, they're never going to put a bad picture of the plant in the catalog. So you got to take that a little bit with a grain of salt. But I like to look through the garden catalogs, dream of some ideas, and then I also look at them and see how long they need to, if I start seeds, how long is it going to take them to get up, how long to get transplanted. There's some varieties, like Oregon Spring is one in a catalog. It's a tomato that you can plant early. It will handle cool temperatures and it doesn't set it back. So I like to look for some of that information in the catalog so that I can kind of make a plan. Where am I going to plant my vegetables? If I am going to start seeds, when do I need to start them? And when can I plant them? And then how am I going to do my garden? So we recommend that you not plant your vegetables in the same spot every single year. I know that was how my grandma did it. It worked for her. It did not work for us. So we recommend you rotate your vegetables so your tomatoes are only in the same spot every 3 years. And making a plan and drawing kind of like the diagram like they have up there can help me remember, because I don't know about you, but I have a 3-year-old and I don't remember things as well as I used to before he was born. I think he sucks my memory out. He definitely steals all of my energy. I know that one for sure. I know. So I like to go back and look at these plans and remember, where did I plant things? I also like to make notes in a journal or something with the plan of what worked really well. Back to those 2 new varieties that I had tried. So I'm going to use something like this. I'm cheap. I buy just a simple notebook, and that's what I use. But I want to know what worked really well. What varieties did I absolutely love? And I also kind of keep a note of what the weather conditions were like. Because if it's really, really hot and dry, that's going to impact how well certain varieties do. In North Dakota, I had a tomato variety that I thought I was going to love that did not do anything at all for me. But I'm going to try it here in Kansas because North Dakota's summer was just not long enough for it. Right about the time it was getting ready to do awesome and I was getting ready to get a ton of tomatoes, it decided to frost. So I'm going to try that variety again. So I want to know what worked, and I want to write down what didn't work. Because like I say, I like to play around with some varieties and see what works for me. So if it didn't work, I want to note that down so in 5 or 10 years when I'm looking through those garden catalogs again and my then 13-year-old has sucked out all my brain power, I remember what didn't work for me. So, and that's going to help me make my future plans. I also want to write down where those plants were in the garden, because if I see a pattern, I plant my tomatoes in one spot, they don't do very well. 3 years later, I plant them back in that spot, they're not doing very well. I'm not going to plant my tomatoes back there again. So that helps me make a plan for the future by remembering what has happened in the past. And so that plan can be something really simple.
So what's the difference between the ground soil, like a tomato in a pot,
Mm-hmm.
that's in like a flower pot, a tomato plant in a flower pot? How do you rotate, if you will?
Okay, so the difference between the question is, what's the difference between a tomato planted in the ground and a tomato planted in a pot? If I grow a tomato in a container, I will reuse the soil for a couple years, but I'm gonna change the soil out after a little bit because my nutrients are gonna be depleted. I can keep adding fertilizer to it, but eventually the soil's just not gonna be as good as it should be. So in my pots, I usually change my soil out every 2 to 3 years. If I have a disease or an insect issue with either the flowers or the vegetable, I'm gonna change that soil that year. Because a lot of our diseases are soil-borne, so I don't wanna potentially carry that over to the next year. So, does that answer your question? Okay. So, like I said, remembering the past helped me plan the future. But I'm really kind of looking forward to my garden. I have seeds started in my basement. I don't know where I'm planting them because I don't have a garden spot in my backyard yet, but I am very hopeful that I will have a garden somewhere. They will get planted somewhere. I don't know where, but somewhere. Tool time. Does anyone remember the TV show Home Improvement with Tim Taylor? That was one of my favorites growing up. I loved Home Improvement and I love tool time. And now is the tool time for getting ready for gardening. So lawnmowers, if you haven't had them, now is a good time to get an oil change. It's not time to mow, as you can obviously tell, but some of my cool season grasses were starting to green up in my yard. Before our last cold spell, I think the temperatures here at Butler County, the soil temperatures were 50 degrees. So our grasses, if we stay warm, we're gonna unfortunately be mowing a little sooner than maybe we think. So now is time to get an oil change, because there's nothing worse than taking your lawnmower in to get an oil change, and you need to mow, and you're still somewhere in the queue of getting your oil changed. So getting those tools ready, getting them cleaned up. New lawnmower blades or sharpening lawnmower blades, whichever way you go. It's always nice to start with a fresh, sharp set of lawnmower blades. And we do recommend approximately every 15 hours you sharpen those. If you ever notice that your yard is getting kind of a whitish cast, it's not looking sharp cut, it's looking frayed, that means your lawnmower blades need sharpened. And that leads to potentially more disease issues, and your grasses just don't do quite as well. Garden tools, if you've got some garden tools, get them cleaned. My dad always sharpens his shovels in the spring every year before he uses them. Now, not like knife edge sharp, but he sharpens them. Because it's amazing what a sharp shovel can cut through and how much less work it is, even if you clean out some of the nicks. And then we always check the handles if there's rough edges, splinters, because I hate splinters. I hate needles in general. So we sand those rough spots. If it's not a sealed or a plastic handle, we oil the handles so then they're ready to go. That helps them last a little longer. And pruners, again, make sure they're clean, sanitize, and make sure that they have been sharpened as well so that you're ready to go for the year. Starting seeds. Like I said, I have seeds started in my basement. They're growing really well, which is exciting, but don't know where they're going. So for me, starting the seeds kind of helps with the itch. When we had those warm days in January, and I really wanted to get out and work in the garden, I planned to start some seeds instead because they're gonna last longer. Now there are some things that we could plant here pretty soon. Your lettuce and peas, those could actually be planted outside relatively soon. They will handle a light frost. But most of our other stuff, we should wait for a little while longer. And like I said, I like to start seeds because I like to try new varieties. I have that confetti pepper is the little variegated one that does well in pots. I can't find that one locally, so I like to start that one. And I don't know about you, but I don't need a 4-pack or 6-pack of Better Boy tomatoes. I love them, but I don't need that many. So I can control how many of each plant and how many of each variety I can grow. The keys to starting seeds, you need lots and lots of light. Seedlings don't care about quality of light, they just want lots of it. So at home, I actually use fluorescent light bulbs. Have them on for 14 to 16 hours a day. keep them about 4 inches above the seeds, and they do really well with that. You do need a seed starting mix, and obviously you need seeds of some kind. But another thing that I do, I find myself, I've been eating a lot of salads lately, so I started a lettuce bowl. And again, you do that the same way. You just need a container. Doesn't have to be really deep because they're not going to last too long. Sprinkle your seeds on top. Put them under a grow light, and in 30, 45 days, depending on the variety, I have a bowl of lettuce that I can cut on and make salads, and some of them will regrow for me as well. So that's something that I have done to kind of help with the seed starting and the gardening itch. As we get warmer, if you didn't clean the beds last fall, yes?
I grow sprouts, so I can start all my little things of all different kinds of sprouts. And so you got all this nice little reds and green, and you can throw those in salads and
Yep.
things too. You don't have to have all this setup of lights and all that.
That's true. Sprouts are also a good way to get started to do some gardening in the wintertime. So as we get warmer, it's time to think about trimming our perennials back. We do tend to recommend, or at least I tend to wait until temperatures during the day are consistently over 50 degrees. We have a lot of native bees and a lot of good native insects that overwinter in the bushes and things. Plus, like the purple coneflower, you'd be amazed at how many birds like to eat the seeds off of the purple coneflower. They munched on those at my parents' house most of the wintertime off and on. But wait until it's over 50 degrees to cut your perennials back. That tends to help your native bees and your pollinators as they're overwintering. They'll still survive if you move them, but you've moved them someplace else, so they're no longer around your flower beds. Once you've cut your perennials back, it's a good time to add some mulch in your beds if you need them. It's a whole lot easier to put it down before the plants are growing than to have to work around the plants. And we just actually had a workshop this weekend on pruning fruit trees. So now is the time to prune your fruit trees. Remove dead branches, take out anything that is crossing. The joke is you should be able to throw a ball through your fruit tree without hitting a branch. So pruning fruit trees, you can also prune your shade trees. Not typically your maples and your birches, though. We wait for those till they leaf out because they tend to bleed excessively. And they don't have that issue as much after they've leafed out because there's a place for that excess water to grow. And then you can also prune your shrubs. Obviously, not lilacs, not forsythias, things that are going to bloom in the spring. But a lot of these plants, it's easier to prune them now when you can see the branch structure and you can see them versus when they have the leaves out. And I always analyze pruning. Even if you do a bad pruning job, it's like a bad haircut, it's going to grow out of it. So never be afraid to go out and try and prune your fruit trees, prune your trees and shrubs. Just try and keep your pruning to about that 25 to 30%. If you go over 30%, that can set the plant back. You can be under 30%, but over 30%, especially on fruit trees, is going to encourage a lot of suckers and a lot of issues. So, and if you do have some bare spots in your yard, if you have a dog, I have a golden retriever, he's worn some bare spots in the yard since we moved. Now is a good time to do some dormant seeding of cool season grasses, so your fescues and your bluegrass. You can go out, you can sprinkle some seed right where it is. If, and I'm hoping not, if we did get another light round of snow, sprinkling it right on top of the snow actually is a great way to dormant seed, because as the snow melts, the seed's going to drop down to that bare spot, and the seed's going to provide the moisture to help that. The melting snow will provide the moisture to help the seed germinate. And if you haven't been, we have been really dry. So watering if you have some plants that you really love in your landscape, watering some trees that are less than 2 years old out in your lawn, watering those on these warm days is going to really help them. We were very, very dry. Some of the plants may struggle a little bit getting going, so that extra moisture can help keep them from drying out. But Do you guys have any gardening or horticulture questions for me? I'd be happy to answer and happy to help out. It can be houseplant questions too. I like houseplants. Okay.
How long are seeds good? If you're buying seeds from a catalog, how long are they good?
Question was, how long are seeds good if you want to keep them and store them? It depends on the seed. So lettuce, carrots, some of our things with small seeds are typically only good for a couple years before the germination rate really drops off. Tomato seeds, peppers, things like that can be good 5 years or so. But you do need to store, they do need to be stored somewhat cool. So if you store them in 90-degree weather outside or temperature extremes, they're not going to last quite as long. But I've successfully done tomato seeds for sure for 5 years. Carrots, small seeds gets a little iffy after 2.
Hornworms, how do you get rid of them? I hate to touch them.
To-
They're just awful.
Tomato hornworms, every tomato grower's least favorite critter. They turn into beautiful moths, but I don't like them on my tomatoes. There's products you can apply if you are comfortable using chemicals. I believe 7 is labeled for those. You do have to be careful with some of those with the bees. I know I have a friend that hates bugs, and she actually gets some of those leaf things or the litter collectors that have the jaws, and she uses those to pick them off so that she doesn't have to touch them.
Where do they come from?
They usually overwinter as an egg, and then they hatch in the spring, or the butterflies, moths flying up here. So. Okay. There's no other questions. If you are interested in gardening and interested in learning more about container gardening, we are having a free class on March 10th at the Butler Community Building, talking about gardenings in containers or raised beds, anything like that. So we do invite, you're more than welcome to come. It is, like I said, it is free. It's going to be fairly informal. We'll have a presentation, and then if you have questions, again, much like this, we're happy to answer them. So, but if you do have any questions, I do have some cards. Feel free to call the extension office. I love to get out of the office and go and take a look at people's yards and gardens. Like I said, I have a brand new yard and house to work with, and I always like to get ideas of things that I should do around my house. But thank you guys for being a great audience. I hope you enjoy this beautiful weather. It has been simply gorgeous, and it looks like it's going to be really beautiful for the next week. And hopefully some rain coming up. Fingers crossed. Thank you guys.
All right, thank you so much, Calla. We will have a break until right about 10. Bob Peterson will be here, and I think he's bringing Alvin the Alligator with him. So we will reconvene right about 10. Thank you. There's yours. I like the show until you, yeah. Redid this room. To me.
just wait for this and we'll just let this keep playing for him. We'll have that.
Wandering Mike, and I have another one. I mean, it's up to you. Yeah, got those. It's just sitting on the charger, so we can take whatever we want.
All right, I'll just.
And then slide advancing. Right, and I will at 10 o'clock. I will right. Happy to introduce Bob Peterson. Bob is a professor of theater and speech here at the college, and he's going to talk to us today about the Alvin the Alligator series. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, good. I love it. I think that happened because Caden started the applause, and then you heard that, so you felt obligated to applaud. But thank you, thank you, Caden, because he will do anything for extra points in my class. So there you go. So yeah, I am very pleased to be here this morning to talk about not only Alvin the Alligator, but talk about. I heard some of you can't hear me. I don't have the to do that. How do I turn this up? How do I turn this? Am I okay? Okay, good. All right, thank you. I'm here to talk not only about Alvin the Alligator, the children's theater, but I wanted to give you first, before that, a little background of children's theater and how it happened. First of all, you're going to turn into my students, and I want a show of hands. I always ask my classes, I need a show of hands. So how many of you in this room knew Daryl Patton, P-A-T-T-E-N, the first drama? Yeah, terrific. Yeah, terrific. Thank you. Well, Daryl Patton was the one who instigated the whole concept of children's theater at Butler Community College. And back in 1966, he said, we need to do something to make sure that children appreciate the magic of theater. So he did a children's theater show where children would come in and see it from the different area schools, and then loved Daryl dearly, may he rest in peace, but he was a little crazy because he even took it to Wichita, and he would put it in a truck and load it over there to the Center of the Arts and do that. So the succeeding directors went, oh no, come on. I mean, that was just, wearing people out. So what happened was they would do a show here for a matinee of about 2 weeks, and elementary school children from the different grade schools in El Dorado and the surrounding communities would come in and see these shows and get the experience of live theater. So when I came to Butler a couple of years ago, hold for a laugh, thank you, I was doing some children's theater, but then I realized I really didn't like all of the literature I was seeing there, because I thought the children needed to see the old fairy tales. Because, by the way, I don't know if you're aware of this, but all the old fairy tales were created for one reason: to teach values. Cinderella teaches the value of kindness. Sleeping Beauty teaches the value of patience. Jack and the Beanstalk teaches the value of courage. The Emperor's New Clothes teaches the value of self-confidence. So I liked all of those ideas, and I thought, I'd like to do those, but everybody's seen Cinderella. Everybody's seen Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Feather comes later. So I decided what I would do was take the old fairy tales, which were in public domain, and put them in new clothing. So I would rewrite the traditional fairy tales and set them in a different culture. So what we would do was invite the students, but send out the original fairy tale for their teachers to read to them, plus any information about the new way we were telling it. For instance, I decided to take Cinderella and present it in ancient Japan and call it Kabuki Cinderella. Therefore, my students got to study about Kabuki theater, and they presented it in Kabuki style. And then the elementary school children were sent a packet where their teachers, hopefully, would inform them about the culture of Japan. And I wanted to show you a picture from that first production of Kabuki Cinderella. That is the stepmother and the two ugly, can we say that word in this culture? Yes, ugly stepsisters. Now, what makes it interesting about this show, a couple of things. I was running out of money, because we were going to do a big musical for the last show, and I knew I had to have every penny. So I didn't have enough money, I thought, to do this show. So I sent out a bulletin, which is no internet, no email, nothing. You just took over your announcement to Jenny Pletcher and the secretarial service. She'd type it up at 3 o'clock, and the next day it would be in everybody's box. And I said, help. I need any kind of fabric you have, any kind of old bolts of cloth, because I have enough money to buy $25 worth of paint, but that's it. And the next day, after that was announced, I went to my office and I couldn't get in because literally, this is true, it was stacked full of cloth, quilts, bedspreads, whatever. In fact, the one on the left, that's a quilt, that's a bedspread. And then the one on the right, that was a big bolt of cloth. And then the one in the middle, the ugly the stepmother, that was nothing more than a couple of curtains. And so we made all of these clothes, these kimonos, these Japanese clothing, for nothing, literally, because everybody cleaned out, all the secretaries, and excuse me, today they're called administrative assistants, but in those days, the secretaries and all of the teachers, they just brought me their old bedspreads and whatever. Now, the other thing about that is interesting, I don't know if you could tell, but that's all kabuki makeup. It was all told in style. And by the way, this was a very successful show. The kids really loved it. The children who saw it really loved it. And that is, in kabuki theater, all the roles are played by men. 3 men. In fact, when they do the ballet of Cinderella, the ugly stepsisters are always played by male dancers because they just are, whatever they are. So that's interesting. Now, I don't know if you're aware that the foundation auction is coming up this weekend or, soon, the gentleman who puts that together is a brilliant event planner, and that's him on the left. Tom Middlestat is now he was a student of ours here. But those are indeed just quilts and whatever that were made into kimonos, and the 3 men then played the stepmother and the ugly stepsisters, and they were very successful. Is there another slide of kabuki?
Not of kabuki, no.
Okay, well, we'll move on then. So I decided, well, that was so successful. What's my next slide?
Sleeping Feather.
So I decided to take Sleeping Beauty so that they could learn all about patience. And I decided to tell it in a different culture, and we told it in Native American culture. So the designer, he built me a mountain of snow. And I wanted to tell it in that, and then that style. And then we had the beautiful princess, the Native American princess, and the Native American prince, and they told the story of Sleeping Beauty, and it was called Sleeping Feather. And we sent out to all of the students, the teachers, packets about the Native American culture, and so that they could make all of those studies. Now, respectfully speaking, this is kind of an interesting thing about the costumes. This is why mothers are so terrific. This was to be done in February, so I went home over Christmas break to my parents' house with a big stack of cloth and bolts of cloth and patterns, and I said to my mother, so I'll shovel your old sidewalk of snow, I'll do anything you need around the house, can you make me some costumes? And my mother made all of these costumes within 5 days, which was and it was a whole set of them, but about 15 costumes. She did not leave her sewing machine and sewing table, and I didn't leave the sidewalk because I was shoveling. So it was a storm that weekend, and so I had to open my mouth and say, "Yeah, I'll shovel yours." And God took care of that. So there you go. So that was a very successful show. Also, what is my next? And so I had wanted to teach the children Jack and the Beanstalk, which would be, of course, Pineapple Jack, because I said it in Hawaii. And so we went to Hawaii, and I really was trying to talk. At that time, the dean was Larry Patton, and I was trying to talk him to a field trip to Hawaii as research for the play. He didn't buy it. So, but I tried. But for this particular production, what we did, and you can't see it in that slide, but we took all of the map of all of the shapes of the islands in Hawaii, and we took the 3 most interesting shapes, if you look down on a map, and we replicated them so that the shapes that you see there are the exact shapes of 3 of the Hawaiian islands. And the way that Jack went from island to island is he had a surfboard with, blue streamers on it, so it looks like he was riding through the through the water. And unfortunately, the young man who played Pineapple Jack, he's there on the left, he was very acrobatic. So he could do somersaults and cartwheels from island to island. And the children were absolutely dazzled by it. For that performance, by the way, we give acting awards every year. And that young man won the Best Actor of the Year for his performance as Pineapple Jack. And it was one of the very few times that a children's theater show production produced a Best Actor winner. But he was really terrific. What's
Pharaoh fashion.
and then the Emperor's New Clothes. I decided to set it in ancient Egypt during the time of Moses. And there we have the emperor, the emperor, the pharaoh, and he is realized he's made a fool of because these two tailors come in, of course, and tell him they'll make him great clothes for his parade. These costumes, and that slide is a little dark, but they were professionally designed by a professional costumer. She came on campus and was a guest clinician for 6 weeks, and she designed the costumes, held classes with our students, and those costumes, a lot of them, beautifully constructed, beautifully designed, we still have in stock. I like that story so much, and I like the idea of teaching children, have confidence in yourself, that I wanted to do it again. And so I decided this time I would set it in 1962 Washington, D.C., John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy. And so it became First Gent. And is that the next slide, please? Oh, yeah, there it is. And by the way, what was wonderful about that is the costumes for the young lady playing Jacqueline Kennedy were complete, beautiful replicas of what Oleg Cassini designed for Mrs. Kennedy. We had a professional tailor do that for us. And all of the sets were all painted on, and it was an interesting history lesson because for this show, what we sent, of course, to the grade schools was the Kennedy administration, about President John F. Kennedy. And what was amazing to me is that a lot of the students hadn't heard about past presidents. So we were able to do that for them. And I do want to, just as an editorial, just take my word for this. The young lady who played Jacqueline Kennedy studied her voice pattern perfectly and her posture perfectly and really gave a very nice, lovely performance. And this was the one show that we started with the Star-Spangled Banner. The actor playing JFK came out and said, would you all please stand for the Star-Spangled Banner? And it was a really important time that I had heard that students were no longer saying the Pledge of Allegiance and things like that. So I thought, okay, we gotta reintroduce those traditions. So that was First Gent. And next is?
I think it's Great Scott.
And this is Great Scott. This is the story of the princess and the frog, told as if the frog was the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland. So what we sent to the grade schools at that time was all the information about Scotland and the culture of Scotland and the plaids and all of that kind of thing. And so the Loch Ness Monster appears, and she, of course, doesn't like him, and of course then he turns into the handsome prince at the end. And so that was really fun. In fact, I've done this production twice. I liked it so much, and I also liked just the value it was teaching. And is that all we have of?
Yeah, then Alvin.
Okay, you may. Is it an Alvin thing? Okay. There it is. This is Alvin the Alligator. So I decided I'd worn out all of the wonderful world of fairy tales, and I decided to create my version of Mickey Mouse. Walt Disney had Mickey Mouse, so I decided I needed to create my own character. I wear Lacoste. You can't see it here because it's not very, but I have the alligator always. No, this is a crocodile. Lacoste is a crocodile, and I've always worn Lacoste. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if this a crocodile would come to life? So I decided to write a story where a young man was at a preppy school. He has the alligator ripped off his shirt. He throws it into a wishing well after turning 3 times around, because that's how it happens. And the alligator comes out alive as an alligator, and what he does. And here's the whole thing with this story, is that I am redoing this show, and I have rewritten it, and it's the show that's playing today. In fact, it plays at 1:30 this afternoon. And we'll play again on Thursday, and then we close, because we've played all last week to all of these, about 1,250 children. But I wanted to do the show again because it is a show about tolerance. It's a show about accepting people for who they are. You don't judge people by the way they look, by the way they talk, or what they wear. You judge them by the way they treat other people and how they treat you. And that's the lesson that this young man learns, is that the alligator, who he doesn't want to see anymore after he gets off his shirt because he's slimy and he's green. But when the alligator turns to be the real true friend that he has, he realizes that he has to judge people for who they are and what they are. The production that I've rewritten the ending in this playing this afternoon, I'm very pleased with it. I can finally put it away. Because the first version of this I wrote in 2002. And 20 years later, I think I finally got it right. I don't know. We'll see. No, I'm very proud of that. He said right. He said left. He said right. Okay, Caden has stepped out for just a minute, and as I think you can see that I am technically illiterate. I am technically challenged, so he'll be coming back in just a minute. But the other thing about this particular show is that after he was on campus and did this, I didn't want to leave the alligator alone because he became my Mickey Mouse. And I decided he needed to go elsewhere, and we'll be showing some slides here in a minute. But he went to Hollywood, and in Hollywood he learned, you can't, it was all about drugs because he became someone else. And so that was when Nancy Reagan was into the, yes, I need the next slide, thank you. That's when Nancy Reagan was into the Just Say No campaign. And so I thought it was interesting that he said slowly, so we get, clicker. Caden gave me the clicker, and I don't do clickers. Okay, after this brief commercial and a station break, we will be right with you. No, there we go. So thank you. So he went to Hollywood, where he learned about drugs. But then he decided to go out west. And this is when Alvin went out west. And he decided, he saw this community, and were trying to put a community band together, and the mayor was so Alvin disguised himself as a great country western star. And he comes in to save the little town of whatever that little town was out west. By the way, 7 young men have played Alvin. Gabe Templin, who remember Barb Templin? Gabe Templin was the very first Alvin 20 years ago, and 7 young men have played him. A couple of them have played him a couple of times. This is Kevin Norfleet. He was our 6'2" Alvin. And now let me go to the next adventure that Alvin did. Where's the clicker? I'm sorry. This is a really well-organized program today. Can you tell? I've been doing other things. And this Alvin was amazing because the 6'2" Alvin went out west. This Alvin was 5'5" and was Asian American. So Alvin has taken a lot of different looks. Well, Alvin, in this episode, goes to a museum, a space museum. He gets into wrong one. Stay there. Thank you. Goes to a space museum, and he gets into a rocket. And yes, you will stay with that one. Thank you. And he goes into the museum. He hits in a rocket, and he hits the wrong lever, and it takes him to Dualuna, which means the planet of 2 moons. And when he gets on this strange planet, an evil princess takes over and is making life miserable for all the world. And so he has to conquer that. For this performance, that young man there, that's the second time that a children's theater show has won the Best Actor Award, and he won the Best Actor Award for this particular performance. Okay, now we can go to the next one. Thank you, Trish. I decided Alvin needed to go back home. And so Alvin went back to the Digby Prep School campus, and this is a new Frank. And Frank is running for class president, and he does some things that aren't real ethical politically, and Alvin has to be his Jiminy Cricket to his Pinocchio. So this was fun to bring him back. So then I brought Alvin back home after this was called Being Frank. And 2 years ago, we didn't do a show last year because of COVID. It was Uniquely Frank. And by the way, every title of every show is an adverb that can either modify a noun or a verb. In other words, Uniquely Frank. That young man is uniquely himself, or I want to be uniquely frank with you and just tell you how it is. So all the titles are placed that way. And I think that might be the last slide. You want to check? Oh, wrong. Last slide, I think. This is the present Alvin and the present Frank that are playing in the theater today. And I think we have with us Alvin. Yes. Caden is also, besides technically brilliant, he is very brilliant as Alvin the Alligator. And so Alvin the Alligator, by the way, never says hello. He has a signature greeting, which is
Howdy do.
And so that's the only way he knows how to say hello is howdy do. And at first that throws everybody off. He also played Alvin for me in Uniquely Frank, and I'll give you a spoiler alert. In that show, they go into the wishing well, and it's Freaky Friday. Alvin goes into Frank's body, and Frank is in this body. And so then they have to figure out what they're going to do because people, yeah. You got the gag. So in this one, I have gone back, which is called Truly Frank, and it is because in this show, Frank finds his true self. And it's all about accepting people, and it's all about tolerance, and it's all about don't judge people by the way they look, because everybody on the Digby Prep School campus in the world of the play judges him. And he can't understand it because when he was on the shirt, everybody thought he was cool and terrific. And when he came off the shirt, he was a little like nerdy.
I guess. I don't know.
He was nerdy. Hold for a laugh. Okay. He was a little nerdy, and people didn't like him anymore. And then when he does something very heroic and wonderful, and they realize that every person or every alligator has something to give. So, wanted to explain to you a little bit about this costume. He forgot to safety pin today. This costume was built by Carol Renfro, who was the administrative assistant at the Fine Arts Office for years. And this is the second costume. The first one is now on loan at Parsons High School because they are doing one of the Alvin shows there. And unfortunately, we can't go see it because it's playing at the same time our show is playing. So the second, also, which if you have a chance, I didn't bring it over, but there's the rehearsal suit that he wears. In other words, he wore a rehearsal suit that was made out of muslin through the whole show, through the whole rehearsal process, so he can get the feel of the tail, he can get the feel of the hands, he can feel of all of that. And if you look at the rehearsal suit that is in the display cabinet in the lobby of the theater, it's mostly duct tape because it has just been so worn. It's worn through because the actors who have played Alvin are very hard on it because Alvin does somersaults, he does cartwheels, he does all this physical things that really are very hard on the material, on the costume. In fact, you will note this costume had to be reinforced because the tail was wearing out because of just being so much use and so much physicality in terms of the presentation. So, also, some of the Alvins have chosen to wear the hat backwards like this. I prefer the Alvin who can wear it that way because I want to make sure the role has to have teeth, after all. So I always have the Alvin do that. I will ask, let me double check here. We're in good shape. In terms of the physicality of the role, Caden did not know I was going to ask him this. What is, for you, the hardest part in terms of manipulating the costume?
Well, I'll take the thing. Well, definitely the tail. The tail is the biggest portion. I think that's what the whole
practice rehearsal suit is used for, is to figure out what you're doing with this. It's like a third leg. But on top of that, you're in a big burlap sack, and you're running around the stage, around the well. You're screaming, and you're sweating, but you have to keep that energy high, and the kids love it.
Great. Now, if you would, I think you can all see him from here. Go ahead and sit down to show them how you have to manipulate the tail. So just sit down. Great, and that's where it is. And then, if you will, I want him to do one more move for you that he does in the show. He jumps on the whale, and the whale, that's another show. He jumps on the well, and he lounges. And so make the move for them, because this was more than one rehearsal getting this done correctly. Now, believe it or not, he does that. Yeah. He does that very smoothly and very cleanly, but it takes rehearsal, hours of rehearsal. See, the audience doesn't know that it took 8-10 minutes to get that 3-second bit down so that the tail goes into the right place and everything works cleverly. The other thing that happens for him that's very interesting is, okay, spoiler alert, at the end of the show, he does crown a princess of the Lilac Cotillion. That's part of the plot. And so he crowns the girl who wins the crown. It has been, I know, very difficult for him, because have you ever tried to manipulate and crown a person with those? Yeah. So it's interesting, because yesterday the princess lost her crown because he crowned her, and and I'm sort of like, well, it's very hard to manipulate that with what he has to work with. So terrific. Now that said, is there anything that I, as always, tell my students in the classroom, what have I forgotten to say? Are there any questions that you have about the Children's Theater show, the Alvin shows, and anything of Caden in terms of what he has to go through? Yeah. Well, I would like to ask Caden. Now, he has a distinctive voice as Alvin. And where did you come up with that voice? How did you get that? And you are very welcome to say, I had a very brilliant director who helped me. But you don't have to say that.
Well, exactly that. I'll take that. Thank you. Yes, exactly. My director, the first day you go to auditions, and he kind of gives you a rundown. And then after that, you refine it. It's either a mix of Ned Flanders from The Simpsons. He's like, howdy diddly diddly do. And then also Arnold Stang from many different titles, the chunky commercials. It's just that nasally kind of nerdy voice of the, hey guys, how's it going? Alvin the Alligator. A-L-V-I-N Alligator. Yeah.
Thank you. And here's, you may. And here's the other thing that, by the way, is so rewarding and satisfying. When the children leave the theater, we, number one, give them an activity book, a 6-page activity book that has puzzles and problems to solve and jumbles and scrambles. And also, this show is about who really is your best friend. So in the activity book, we have one little page that says, write a short essay about your best friend. And I think it was Caden who said to me after we put the activity book together, great, Mr. Peterson, assigning homework. They were here just to have a good time, and now you've assigned them homework. So we do. And the other thing they get is a bookmark with the Alvin the Alligator official logo and all that. And then we also have given them, which we need to run more of these off, an alligator hat. They get to take that with them. And then to the teachers, we give them a teacher's guide. And in the teacher's guide are critical thinking questions that we encourage them to use in the classroom. And that is questions like, talk with your students about, how would you treat Alvin if he came to your school, if you didn't know who he was? Or what makes a true friend? Or what? So we have these questions that we pose, hopefully that the teachers will use when they leave, and we'll use them in their classroom this week. In fact, I may be daring enough to do follow-up phone calls and say, are those helpful to you? And actually, I hope they are, because I want those students to learn those values now. So we send those out. But we didn't include a picture of this, which I had one from yesterday. But yesterday it was warm enough that Alvin and Frank, there they are. There's Thank you. There's Frank not realizing that Alvin is sitting beside him and he's polishing his nails on Alvin's tail. So he's just, taking that. So yeah, but yesterday, Alvin and Frank, those two characters, were outside saying goodbye to the 200 students who were leaving. And by the way, we've limited audiences because of COVID. We promised them that it would be one school district per show. However, the opening day, the name of the school will be left out here. The opening day, they were to bring 200 students so we could space them and socially distance them. And these kids kept coming. They brought an extra 100 students. And so it was one school district, so that was their deal. But, okay, everybody in this room is sworn to secrecy now. At one point, I was thinking, oh, I hope the fire marshal doesn't come in, because teachers were standing against the walls. It was just crazy. But it was really wonderful in terms of the kids really enjoying it. But what was so really nice yesterday, they got to go outside. Alvin and Frank did, to say goodbye to the kids. And if you could see, and I'm sorry I don't have the picture of it because we do have pictures, of these students saying goodbye to Alvin. It's more than just see ya, Alvin. Even in this crazy world we're in right now, they were running into his arms. It was hugs, because they wanted Alvin to hug it. In fact, there were two lines going out both ways, and they were all singing goodbye to Alvin. And the line he wasn't in, the kids were saying, goodbye, Alvin, goodbye, Alvin. And finally, I had to go over and say goodbye to the kids. Come on, let's go. So, because he couldn't see them because they were on the other side, so I kept trying to get him to go from side to side. But that, for me, is the rewarding thing, is hopefully they're taking away that wonderful value of tolerance and acceptance, but to see that these kids have connected and gone into the world of the play. They have accepted this college kid in the green suit as Alvin, and they say goodbye to Alvin. That's Alvin. I would have to, I'm just speaking for you, but that has to be rewarding for you. Yeah. Yeah, to have those kids hug him and say whatever. And so, yeah. And by the way, we do sterilize the seats and all that afterwards with, so everything's all clean after each performance. It's like that then there. So good. That said, do you have any questions? Yes. Yes. Yeah, that all came, yeah. And right. In fact, yes, we put together the activity book because it's all Alvin-oriented. And this year, I have to give credit to Caden. I just gave him some things to do, and I said, come up with a jumble. In other words, I gave him words like Alvin, wishing well, all the words that were within the play. Oh, and before that, by the way, I used bigger words in the play on purpose. Like I used the word amphibian. Let me refer to him at one point. Here's what we do. We make a list of vocabulary words, define them, send those out to the teachers and say, why don't you work with your students and tell them what these words are? Tell them the definition of the word amphibian. So when they come to the play and we use it only once, they'll know what it means. Cotillion, those kinds of words. So I like to treat this as an educational process. But yes, the activity book is from us, and this year Caden helped with that and put that together, but it's our design. So we have the copyright on that. Yeah, for sure. Right. However, no. There is the children. It is written for children. However, the Saturday performance at 2 o'clock this past Saturday is the open performance. And by the way, not that you couldn't sneak in to see one of the matinees. Of course, we're in a kind of a funny time. We have 200 students coming this afternoon at 1:30, so there are 100 seats left over. But we've basically said to the school districts, if you're only comfortable with your kids coming, we'll honor that because of the COVID. But however, it's Saturday at 2 o'clock is the public performance of that. And if that wasn't on there, I'll have to go talk to marketing, and we'll get that fixed up. I saw a hand. Oh, Norma, thank you. Who was in the play? Your granddaughter? Who was your granddaughter? Oh, Jade. Yeah, she's wonderful, terrific. Well, thank you for coming, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. Okay. Thank you, and I wish I'd had the microphone to you for that. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, I am very proud of them. And Jade's wonderful. She did a wonderful job. So I'm glad you saw the play. Thank you. And I'm very, very pleased with it now. After the 20 years, I think I got it to the point where I'm going to say, okay, I can hit print now, and it's going to be okay. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you. Yes, and I want to make sure that in the future that everybody knows that Saturday performance is open to the public. In fact, now I'm going to say something that's really daring. And that is to say, I am so lucky and blessed to be here and to do what I get to do. And we do 4 main stage shows a year. If by some chance the world went bankrupt and we were only allowed to do 1 play a year, if I'm chairman of the theater department, it would be the children's show for this reason. It affects 1,250 young lives. And it hopefully teaches them a value. Not that our other shows are very important, and they are, but this is the show that I always say to the kids, this is really important work you're doing because you are affecting 12,000, I wish. 1,250 lives was what we had last year, and that's what we have scheduled this year. And I think it's really important. This show is so important. It is just not, oh, they're doing children's theater. No, this is really an important play because of who we reach and who we get to. And what's interesting is that I've had a lot of kids that have come to school here, and they'll say to me, oh, I remember coming to the children's theater show. In fact, the young lady who works, she's a freshman here, and she works in the fine arts office. She said, oh, yeah, I remember coming to see Alvin when I was a little girl. Not this one, mind you. That Alvin's 40 years old now. So, yeah, so it's really important and good. Thank you. Glad you were there. Anything else that I can answer about children's theater? I have rambled on, for sure. Okie doke, for sure. Well, thank you so much. You have been a delightful audience. You have made my morning, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you, and have a good day.
Got it.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Caden, Alvin. We really appreciate it. Again, yes, thank you. We will be back in April. I have an author coming from out of Colorado, and I can't remember the other one somebody who does the Seldom Heard Film Festival is going to bring one of his films and show it and then answer questions about it. So I will see you all in April. Thank you so much for coming.